Pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to Nerf Secrets Revealed. So for today, I would like to do a lot for the series here, of which that stands. Whatever's left, of course, I will do what I can to find as many more topics to talk about. But you know what? There's a lot of things out there that I might as well talk about based on the commercials that Nerf is continuing to advertise to this day. They advertise a lot of things out there that we happen to debunk. A lot of myths out there that we debunk out there would include the fact that elite blasters, they don't necessarily fire up to 75 feet. On average, they could fire between 55 and 65 feet, but it all depends on the angulation of the blaster or the level of the terrain that you're standing on when you're firing it, as well as height and the like, as well as the type of wind conditions and many other lying factors that can in fact accept the type of flight pattern that a dart could travel in. Of course, there are tons of other things that I could probably talk about that principle in general, but why don't I go on ahead and start talking about a few other things about the commercials themselves. There have been a lot of commercials that have simply put had a lot to do with the marketing based on a Nerf blaster in and of themselves. Recently, I've seen a few commercials themselves, and I might as well talk about them in depth. If there are 4 different types of commercials that I've seen commercials for the Elite Infamous, the Modulus Novatron, or as it's called, the Tri-Strike. I don't know how I'm going to be able to get it through to you guys, but I call it the Novatron because we already had a Tri-Strike back then as a Super Soaker. And please be sure to check out my episode on Super Soakers that happen to be very generic, because maybe you'll find something that's relatable to a hidden gem. But going back to all of this stuff about commercials, I've had the Infamous, the Modulus Novatron, Zombie Strike Dreadbolt, as well as the Alpha Strike lineup in and of themselves, based on what blasters have already come out. But why don't I go on ahead and mention about the Infamous first? Because if there's anything that's right about the blaster itself, it's the fact that it happens to have auto-loading technology. You simply feed a dart through the back, and in it goes inside the clip, or drum, or magazine, whichever one that you use whenever you're in a Nerf war. And of course with the fact that it's fully automatic. So Nerf at least got a lot of stuff right about the Infamous itself. If there's one thing that they hadn't really mentioned itself, it's the fact that it takes a lot of D batteries. Of course, they do mention batteries not included, but it would have been nice for most people out there to simply find out what kind of D batteries they would need, because not everybody would in fact be able to read, to be honest. There's plenty of people that are actually illiterate even today with the best types of education systems that we got. Not everybody can read or write very well, but still. Now I'm going to talk about the Novatron itself. Of course, it does mention that it has a side-loading magazine on it, and it also has pump action on the bottom. And you can also use slam fire to your advantage. That part's definitely correct. And it has multiple tactical rails on it. But of course, the big thing that happened to really seal its fate for what it really is, being a big modulus blaster out there, was the fact that it had itself 2 different accessories, of which that I'll mention right away. It had itself the Crash Cores, which is a type of missile launcher reminiscent to that of the Demolisher and the like. And it also had itself a Mega Dart launcher, call it the Rundown. But in pinch, the Novatron Supreme, as I call it, is simply just that. And on a little side note, I've also noticed about the Mediator XL, which simply put a combination of the Mediator, I mean, it's just kind of got that wrong there, but it also included itself a front barrel type blaster and a stock type blaster with a bit of a Zombie Strike, Double Strike reskin. Of course, I've already given those separate names of themselves too, and that stuff had pump action on the bottom and the like, so the Mediator XL does have a lot when it comes to modulus-based creativity. But the Novatron itself, being that it actually had prime action, and that it also utilized a 12-dart clip to its advantage, I would say for sure that being that I actually own all 3 components of the blaster itself, I will say that they got that part right, at least. They definitely got a lot of parts about it correct. They do whatever they can to be honest about the product themselves, but that's not necessarily saying much. And in a pinch, I should mention really quick that commercials aren't always to talk about what's the good stuff about it and what's the bad stuff about it. It's not always about complete and total honesty. To this day, we still do get commercials that aren't completely honest about the products that they showcase. Because after all, the key word to attracting customers of all sorts to these products that are being promoted on all sorts of media are certain key words. Keywords that do in fact sound catchy or able to gather attention as much as possible. So that right there is what you need to know about there. And of course, that's a little something that anyone should learn when it comes to defacing certain commercials out there or debunking certain myths about them. But anyways, on to the Dreadbolt. Now the Dreadbolt itself, in terms of its commercial value, or on the fact that how it's been advertised, is that it's a really big and successful arrow launcher. Although I've already called those types of arrows the Zombie Strike bolts. But to be perfectly honest, of course, these types of arrows themselves also crossed over to the Rebel lineup, so I just simply call them the Nerf bolts. The new generation type of arrow that actually looks like an arrow, but has a squishy tip on it, so it's not that realistic at all. But it does have guide fins on the back and the like to help it stabilize while in the air. But in terms of how the Dreadbolt was advertised, it was advertised as just simply put, priming it from the bottom with a large wrench of some sort, putting the arrow in, or bolt in as I've known it as, and firing. But in reality, that's something out there that wasn't that easy. Not many people actually knew that there was an indicator on the top of the Dreadbolt itself to tell you whether or not you have secured the dart in just right. It was kind of a struggle for some people out there, but being that I own the newer Wrath bolts, I've actually become very accustomed to being able to use these types of bolt blasters, and I don't necessarily know if they're actually going to come back with those, but still. The Dreadbolt itself actually did not hold up that well in terms of the others, but that doesn't mean that I won't do a review on it at all in Afterthoughts, coming soon to a YouTube channel near you, like me. And finally, let me talk about the Alpha Strike series. To start off, they definitely advertised them as being a very successful sort of lineup out there. And in truth, it actually was kind of successful. Now, why I talk this strangely about it is that the Alpha Strike lineup was made very cheaply. They were cutting corners of all sorts. Firing mechanisms were not as complicated with not many parts to use. So of course, pulling the trigger on any sort of Alpha Strike blaster was kind of a chore really much. I mean, every Alpha Strike blaster that I own, which I own just about every single one of them, except for the Lynx and the Uinta, or the Uppercut as they call it. I will say for sure that the Alpha Strike lineup does have some things to pretty much have some concern for. Because first of all, with the first 4 blasters out there that came out, including the Spinneret, Cobra, Fang, and Tiger, and then eventually a few others came by, the Wolf and the Lynx. Now, we don't own the Lynx yet, so I can't really say much about that, but in terms of how the Alpha Strike lineup itself went, there were some times where it came with the generic sort of orange handle, which had a lot of sort of, I guess, honeycomb pattern to it. It was just sort of a ribbed kind of pattern to it, where it wasn't really that comfortable to hold on to. It kind of left marks on your hands, but they eventually revamped it by adding some black solid handles to some of the Alpha Strike blasters to make the grips feel a lot better to hold on to. And since I own an Alpha Strike Wolf with that supposed grip on it, it actually works a lot better, to be honest. But in terms of all the other Alpha Strike blasters, I mean, there were some faults that came into play, and a few other problems of which that there's a lot of them that I could probably talk about, including the fact that some of which were easy to disassemble, seeing as none of them actually came with screws. You see, if you wanted to modify an Alpha Strike blaster, you would actually have to simply snap open the blaster itself. And there are indeed a few snaps that are located throughout the outer shell of the blaster that you could pretty much pull the tabs on and you'd be able to open it up just fine. But of course, that's pretty much just the natural consequence about it whenever it comes to making a very, very cheap Nerf blaster out there. The foregoing of screws to secure the blaster's shell from the outside, as well as some, well, other things out there. I will say for sure that commercials do try their best to simply showcase the blasters in action and the like, and how they work in a brief manner before the time period runs out. And time periods, of course, can change from commercial to commercial, but of course, Nerf's official channel is lined up with the many different commercials that do exist. And you know what? I'd say that there's a lot going on about there that probably could be done there, but you know what? As long as advertising does exist, we will get some information that's not always correct about Nerf blasters, whether or not that they're good or bad. I do ultimately feel awful that the Dreadbolt had just flopped like that because it wasn't clear enough to show that, of course, you had to load it a certain way, as precise as possible, just to get it to work. Precise as possible. But enough about that. Because I do have at least a few other subjects here that I can touch up on before I had to go back to the drawing board and start brainstorming all over again. Of course I will have these struggles every now and then, but still, I'm going to do whatever it takes at this point to find more topics to talk about. So if you want to see more, go down to my channel. Make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.